Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'm here to welcome you. My name is Kristen Fleischman-Brewer. I'm the Director of Public Engagement at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation here in St. Louis, Missouri. Today's workshop is part of a week-long program in collaboration with Monument Lab, the Philadelphia-based public art and history studio, and it's the culmination of a two-year collaboration between Pulitzer, Monument Lab, and a team of local researchers and collaborators. So I'm going to just set the stage, give a very brief summary of our last 2 years to get us to today. So in the summer of 2018, Pulitzer invited Monument Lab to organize a project as a counterpoint to the Pulitzer's exhibition, Striking Power, Iconoclasm in Ancient Egypt. The exhibition brought together objects intentionally destroyed for religious or political purposes across 4,000 years of history. Though the show was historic, it underscored how visual culture facilitates narratives of power, asking people to look deeper at cultural memory and the creation and destruction of monuments, cultural sites, and memorials across time and place. For those of you who know our work, when we do historical shows, we often want to do programs and projects to make historical work relevant to today and to our place. So Monument Lab decided to ask a question with a goal to gather publicly sourced inventories of St. Louis's symbols and sites of memory. So they decided to ask, how would you map the monuments of St. Louis? So what that resulted in is that last summer, Monument Lab and a team of local researchers worked from a field office at the Pulitzer and invited the public to participate in the research by submitting their responses to the question in the form of a hand-drawn map. In addition, they went to 46 events, engaged people from 141 zip codes, and ended up building an atlas of about 750 maps, both traditional and unofficial sites of memory. In the last 2 years, the collaboration has transformed from a public residency and community organizing project to social science evaluation and data sharing. So today, we will share with you our data and how you can use it to further this tremendous work. This is our last public program for the week. Documentation of the previous programs will be posted on the Pulitzer and Monument Lab's websites in the coming weeks. There's a fantastic podcast.
Okay, sounds like Kristen is frozen. I'm Laurie Allen. She was just saying there's a fantastic podcast. They also had a really amazing keynote panel and a panel of activists. And so I hope folks will check those out as well. So I'm Laurie Allen. I'm the research director for Monument Lab, and I'm really happy to be here. This was billed as a workshop, and as you can tell, this format makes interaction kind of difficult. And so we've got some workarounds for that, and we hope that you'll experiment with us in making this into a really a space where your voices can be heard, at least through your typing and your fingers. I'm joined today by a really amazing group of collaborators who we've been working together on this data project for about a year. We've got MK Stallings, Liz Deichmann, Laney, Allison, Nkwocha, and myself, and you'll hear from all of us over the course of the next hour. And we're going to talk about how the data can be used, but I also want to take a moment to point out that these 6 essays approach this question about how to use this data in different ways. And 3 of them are written by people on this workshop right now, in addition to other people. So if there are, if you want to dig in even further beyond this workshop into how to use these data, I really encourage you to go to the Monument Lab bulletin. Allison has just dropped a link into the chat and check out these really awesome essays. Or if we don't touch on the thing that you want, it's likely that someone in one of these essays did touch on the methods that we can imagine for engaging with this data and really making use of it. So as I said, we when we do workshops, we usually sort of spend time forming practices and norms together so that everybody in the workshop can engage. And this is a little tricky. We had a lot of people sign up for this workshop. And so this is set up as a webinar instead of a meeting, because when you're doing things online, you can't be as flexible about just where you put the chairs to make it more interactive or not. And so what we hope is that you'll, because this is set up so that you can't chat and have everybody else see your chat, we've created a Google Doc that is open. And we hope that you'll use that to share ideas, notes, thoughts, perspectives, questions, and just make that the space that is all of us collaborating together. And I think Allie's going to drop that link into the chat as well. We're going to share the slides as well as the chat. I'm sorry, as well as the chat after this session. So we'll share the slides and that doc after the session. This is being recorded. And so since you'll all be in an open Google Doc together, I'll just ask you to treat each other's words with respect. We're not welcoming trolls. And so if a document gets sullied by people who are not here sort of with a goal towards liberation, then we'll just abandon the docs and come back to the Q&A and just be inside the Zoom together. Oops, there we go, sorry. So timing, so we're just getting settled. We're talking a little bit about process, and then I'll turn it over to Allison, who will talk about, the map that we've made. And then, and I just learned, sorry, the chat can be seen by everyone. Cool, I totally thought it couldn't. Great, well, you can use either one, and we'll send them both out absolutely afterwards, and we'll try to do some work to make them make sense. But in any case, so we'll do a demo and map of the printed map, which is the publication that's come out of this research and data collecting process. And that'll be the demo of the map, and Allison will lead us through that. And then MK, Derek, Liz, and Allie will join together in a conversation and talk through some questions. And then we're going to ask everyone who's participating in this workshop to join us in another couple of Google documents that are, again, open, but directly when we get to them, we'll sort of talk through the prompts there and how to sort of think together as a group about answering some questions. And then we'll certainly have time for more open Q&A towards the end. So the subtitle of this workshop is Putting Data into Action. And we definitely intend to do that. And we hope to enable you to do that through this workshop. But before we dive in, I do want to take a step back and talk a little bit about how Monument Lab understands data, and just to touch lightly on why we see data and monuments as connected to one another, and how that shapes the research that we do in Monument Lab. I'm going to talk about it by quoting some people who've put it more clearly than I can. First from a book I've been reading called Data Feminism, Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren F. Klein say, data collection has long been employed as a technique of consolidating knowledge about the people whose data are collected, and therefore consolidating power over their lives. They're basically saying that data is a tool. It's a tool that often gets used by people to claim that they've removed themselves and their perspective from an issue. And that's how people often use data. It seems like they're using data in many cases when people are in a position of power to collect data so that they can avoid listening to what people are actually telling them. Like, instead of believing some people, they collect data about them. And I would say, as a reflection of their statement, we might also say monuments have long been employed as a technique of claiming a historical narrative as true that helps people in power consolidate their power over other people's lives. And I think data is one way that we make a narrative seem necessary, and monuments are another way. And I think it's useful to see them in that light. But back to data, in that same book, D'Ignazio and Klein trace the history of the word data as it is used in English and how it got separated from words like evidence and fact. And they say, identifying information as data rather than as either of these other two terms, evidence and fact, served a rhetorical purpose. It converted otherwise debatable information into the solid basis for subsequent claims. So basically, they started talking about data just to make it more difficult to counter their claims. because there is some notion that data presents information free from interpretation. But they go on to say, but what information needs to become data before it can be trusted? Or more precisely, whose information needs to become data before it can be considered fact and acted upon? And this, I think, is one of the key things we try to tackle in Monument Lab. What kinds of experiences count as data? Whose perspectives are captured in municipal data sets? And it's part of this larger question about monuments, because data is one way that people claim status for their perspectives, and not monuments are another. People build monuments to say, this is the story that we're part of, to convince people that their actions to dominate others are part of a long and righteous story. So we ask about data and monuments. What would it mean to trust people's experience in their own words as a real source of learning? What would it mean if the monumental landscape expressed a richer and more beautiful narrative about us that draws from people's imaginations, that draws from more and broader imaginations? And so that's our goal with our data. But our data is imaginative, and I want to spend one moment thinking about that word. And I'm going to go back to another quote. In this case, one from, I was recently watching a Haymarket Books conversation between Dr. Ruha Benjamin and Dr. Dorothy Roberts, in which Dr. Benjamin says, imagination is a terrain of struggle. Whose imagination reigns? One way to understand the inequalities and injustices we see is that many people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. And part of democratizing and resisting the imposition of that imagination is also cultivating our own counter-imaginaries, a more liberatory imagination. And so imagination is not an afterthought. It's not a luxury. It's not something just for the privileged. It is a terrain of action. And we have to begin to actually struggle and work towards materializing a world in which we can all thrive. She said this like off the cuff, just talking about her research. And I was cooking dinner in my kitchen, and I live alone. There's no one there. I don't have any kind of echo or whatever. And I was like, pause, like wash my hands, transcribe it, because I think this idea of using imagination as a terrain of struggle is very much the way that I want the Monument Lab research to be part of the broader landscape of monumental action. So that's sort of a preface, but really sort of what is this data? Kristen mentioned we gathered maps. We had this form. As you can see, it's largely a blank piece of paper, and MK, Derek, and Liz spent last summer asking people to fill out this form. At the top is our guiding question: how would you map the monuments of St. Louis? And during all of last summer, they went to events and locations around the city with backpacks containing these forms, colored pencils, clipboards, sometimes a tablecloth, and they asked people to share their ideas and answer to this question. For each form, they asked people to name their map, to mark the monuments and significant sites that existed or erased, potential or imaginary. In the field below, we asked people to describe their map, and we also asked people to share their age, home zip code, as well as social media handles or names so that they could get credit. And we asked people, how do you identify, as an optional question? And we'll talk more about that field in particular as part of the form as we keep going. As with many of our research engagements in a residency, we use this form, and you can see, I just love this picture of this is the back of MK, and you can see Derek and Liz in the background as well as Derek's daughter, Luna. But this was basically, and you can even see the clipboard. So this is basically what it looked like when they went to places. And after they got back, they transcribed each form. They took each form and they entered it, and now I will take you to the Airtable. They transcribed the form, and for all the words that were written on why it was there, and this data is available on our website and is what we mean by the data. So they digitized every form and made it into digital data in that way. They scanned it and they transcribed it and made it into words and codes so that the zip codes, the age are all in their own field. They also, on a different field, they gave us for each of the places that were named on a map, every place that someone drew or named, they put it into an inventory. And again, this inventory is part of the data set that we offer as open data for anyone to use or reuse to make use of. So we have it in this form, and you can download it as a CSV from Airtable, or if you're building an application and you want to pull this data in, so you can come here and, you know, click on marked current, and you can see they also gave them a status and a count. And there is the option to download a CSV, which is basically a spreadsheet. You can do whatever you want with it there. And I'm not going to click on this one, but there's also the option to go to GitHub, and if that's a thing that you do and you want to get the code, you want to get the inventories to use in an application, you can get them from here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Allison. Nkwocha has been working with this data and analyzing it to build this paper map that we had in mind as a publication, having it as a giant paper map, the kind that helps you navigate a city, the kind that you can zoom into and out of by pulling it closer to your face and pushing it away. That's what we envisioned for this map. And so I'll turn it over to Allie, who's been working with us on building that map, to talk about how she did the analyzing and making.
Thank you, Laurie. Hi, I'm Allie. I'm working as an intern at Monument Lab this summer. And I'll just start by saying that this process of making the map, you know, converting this pile of 750 individual pieces of paper wouldn't have been possible without Derek, MK, and Liz inputting all of that into Airtables. So let's not underrate how big of a part of the process that is. I haven't been to St. Louis before, but after spending the last 8 or so weeks working with these maps, I feel like I've been to St. Louis. Working from the Airtable information and looking through the scans of all of the individual maps, I use Google Maps as a central location point to pin the spots, like actually associate them with geographic data. Often I dropped into Street View to investigate the exact site of something. For example, it's hard to see a statue in aerial view. So I'd travel along the street and figure out where a proposed monument could theoretically go, or try and get a read on if a place was still open. And so in a sense, I traveled through St. Louis following a stock of either 750 road maps or off of the advice of 750 strangers who were answering the question, where is it important that I know about? So after I collected all of that information in Google, then I transferred those pins, polygons, and lines out of Google into GIS before putting them into Adobe Illustrator so that our graphic designer could create the map that you're seeing right now. You'll see the question at the top, how would you map the monuments of St. Louis? That was our guiding question. That's the question that appeared on everybody's individual map. And I want to reiterate what it says below. This map is an interpretation and a reflection of what we collected. It is impermanent and incomplete. To build off of what Laurie's been saying about data, data is open to interpretation. Data can't be treated as absolute fact or truth. And so everything about this map represents a series of decisions that we had to make along the way to create the document that we're looking at now. We didn't map all 1,044 unique places that were mentioned by people from 141 different zip codes. There were locals, domestic travelers, international travelers. But looking at all of that information, we decided on categories it would be important to sort the data. And again, when you're designing your own way of collecting information from people, you have to design the system of interpretation. And so the system that was decided upon was breaking these locations into 10 types of places and then 3 primary states of places. So the 10 types, which you can see on the bar graph that Laurie is zooming into, they answer the question, what is it? So there's in order of most mentioned to least mentioned, there are buildings, infrastructure, park, artwork, noteworthy sites, somewhere else altogether that's not St. Louis, neighborhoods, personal sites, water and geologic features, or mounds. And then the 3 states, which are the different shades of blue, are proposed / imagined, erased / demolished, or marked / current. And you can see that each of those states is broken down a bit further in the legend, which we'll get to in just a second. We chose to display some of the identities that were shared on the individual maps, just again to reiterate that this is a composite of personal interpretations and experiences. So how did we choose what to put on the map, since we're making decisions and inevitably not every place will be represented on the map? There were 3 things that we decided that were important to show on this map. And so 1 were the places that were listed on at least 14 individual maps. And so that means within that range, there were sites like the Arch, which was mentioned about 350 times. And then there were sites like the former site of Pruitt-Igoe, which was mentioned 14 times. The second category that we thought was necessary to show on the map were places that had a status of erased or demolished or proposed or imagined, as listed in the Airtable by MK, Liz, and Derek. And again, that's a choice that we made, something that we thought was particularly interesting that folks were addressing in the maps that they submitted. The third category of importance is Black St. Louis, and those are sites that were listed by participants who use the words Black or African American to describe their map and the contents of the map. And again, this is something where when you're translating these papers into digital format, you can create all of, you can physically look and see what's repeated. And by logging that in a system like Airtable, I'm not sure what other comparable systems exist, then you're able to sort by that feature. And so we were able to play with what we wanted to go on the map and what was even possible to comb through the data and find. So another way that we created a hierarchy of importance, Laurie, if you'd zoom out a bit, we wanted to point out specifically these 8 sites that appear in the circles. And we made that decision based on the number of times it was mentioned by participants, as well as the way that they described it. And so after looking through these and switching some other options out, we decided that these 8 sites are ones that tell a narrative of the landscape, the city, and the people that live in the city over time. The Mississippi River is why the city is here now, and Cahokia proved it a good place for a metropolis 1,000 years earlier. Mill Creek Valley, Hop Alley, and Pruitt-Igoe illustrate the growth and decline of different parts of the city over time in the face of 20th century urban renewal, and also demonstrate the challenges and discrimination that communities of color have faced in St. Louis. The 1917 race riots do the same. And the Del Mar Divide captures how this history still defines the built environment. And though at times we wanted to metaphorically make the arch disappear, we ultimately thought that it's a single symbol that captures the way that space can be interpreted and experienced in an infinite number of ways. So that's my, it's hard to put the last 2 months in a nutshell. And, we're talking about data and the tables that it exists in, the ways that it's sorted and digitized. But even looking at these digitized scans of individual maps, I can't really reiterate enough how different of a data reading experience it is than looking at more traditional forms of data. And so even though we're making these decisions, some things about the mapping process are inevitably sterile, there's still a very human sense of what these maps are and what they represent to individuals. And now Laurie will talk to us about starting the panel questions.
First I have to pause and be like, wow, Allie, that was awesome, thank you. So I'm not gonna talk about starting the panel questions. Basically, MK, Liz, Derek, and Allie all have just so much that when we talked in planning this to share about this experience. So I'm just gonna dive in and ask this question. And I think for each of these questions, I'm gonna try to ask a couple people and they'll just keep going. We've got a few questions. We're gonna try to get all of these in like, 17, 18 minutes. And then we want to make sure that there's space for you all to talk. But I know there's a lot that MK, Derek, Liz, and Allie can all share. So let's get into it. First is, what are some of your favorite maps? And I think our first person that we want to hear from on this is Liz. If so, this one's to you, Liz. What are some of your favorite maps?
Well, first I want to say this is such a tough question because after spending so much time with all of the maps, I feel like it's difficult to choose just a couple. But these two specifically, I'll start with the one on the right. I really appreciated this map because it pointed out to me what my own biases and interpretations were as someone who's lived in St. Louis all of their life and in particular places of St. Louis. Some of the barriers and other things that prevent entry to certain neighborhoods or other similar sorts of structures have become really normalized in my life. So I really appreciated a map that pointed out how specific this was to St. Louis and kind of the impacts and effects of that. On the left, I actually believe this is a map that came in pretty early in the summer, but I think it was a really helpful kind of framework for me to think about, especially as we started to collect more conceptual maps and think about people's experiences within St. Louis. And I put a keynote there on experiences and not necessarily, like a geography or a monument. Like, it was really interesting to me to start to understand how we would be capturing people's experiences. And I think that speaks to, these aren't just maps, these are people's stories. They're very intimate. And that's what this map really, really came to represent for me. Oh my, I forgot I had two more or one more. I think the one on the left was another one of my favorites. And that's because it was the conversation I had with the person who was filling it out. Something that became really clear to me as we were collecting these maps is you have a very personal experience. A lot of times you could end up having a pretty involved conversation with someone about their map, about their experiences, about what they're including or not including on their map. And I very specifically remember having the conversation with the woman who filled out this map. And we talked through each of the monuments that she put on there and the importance to her in her life. And I think that's something that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. Like, for me, it's not just that map, it's really that experience, hearing her story and then seeing how it translated onto the map.
Thanks. I think, Derek, this one's to you. Do we have the wrong one? Do I need to go to this one?
Okay, yeah. Those are mine. Yeah, so I will echo Liz's point that the conversations that we had with people were just really priceless about their maps. The maps that I chose, these are two maps, and both of them are done by my daughter Luna. She is 14 years old. She was 13 at the time. And the one on the right is her reminiscing about where we used to live. She had lived there from the time she was 3 years old until she turned 9. And so that held a lot of memories. I mean, it was like most of her life. And it's just a simple map. And the thing that struck me about a lot of the maps were the simplicity, but how it had such a profound meaning in them. And it's just like a couple cross streets, and it's where, it shows our house and it shows the little park where we used to go and take walks and play in the playground. And that was just a kind of sweet memory for me. The one on the left is a really cool map. I thought it was cool. And actually, Laurie chose this map to represent the map when we were doing a community kind of discussion around the maps at Washington University. And she didn't know that that was Luna, my daughter's map. And she was like, this is a really great map. I'm like, yeah, that's my daughter's map. And she actually used a picture of her face, and she mapped her senses. Like, this is what I see with my eyes. This is what I smell. These are the flavors that I taste going to different restaurants. And she put those, so that was a really interesting way to actually address mapping. And she's off camera vying for my attention, and please stop. And I told you that she's going to come in there and she's going to bother me. And then there's a third map that I wanted to actually kind of draw these two things together. I don't know if it's on there.
It's
I don't
one
see.
slide back next to Liz's.
It was yeah, it's the one on the right. And this was a map by a young woman who was a refugee or an immigrant. I think she said something in there about being a refugee. But the thing that struck me most about this is the point I made earlier about simplicity and how there's just such a profound impact and meaning to what she's saying. It's just a picture of a hill, and in the background you can see the Gateway Arch, and she talked about the meaning of that for her coming to the United States for the first time as a little girl, and that there was this little creek that she would just see the arch in the background and what that meant to her, and that just really touched me. It was a sweet story. So those are the maps that, you know, like Liz was saying, that these are more than just maps. These are people's stories. This is like the heart and soul of what, you know, people are really feeling. And so it was really an honor to be a part of bringing that to Monument Lab.
I think you were going to talk about yours for a moment.
Yes. Liz and Derek, I love hearing about your experiences with people and watching them draw these maps and talk to them about you. I obviously didn't have that experience, but I kind of forget that I didn't, because even the papers alone, digitized as artifacts, are still so inherently personal. I chose these two maps. I spent a lot of time going through all of the maps this summer, and these are two that stuck out to me around a certain theme. I really like how they touch on the layering of place over time. And I think often when we look at maps, we understand immediately where they are, but we don't always think of them as when they are located. And it's kind of hard to think of a map as a snapshot in time. We often see them as something that remains true over time, but I think these two maps do a good job of playing with that. So they're showing both remnants of Cahokia as well as modern infrastructure. And it raises a question for me: how do we preserve knowledge of what happened in a place as physical evidence is removed? And I mean, that's like the whole field of historic preservation, and a lot of what Monument Lab is thinking about, as well as something that we're having a national conversation about this summer. I appreciate too that it makes me wonder about the forms that humans are capable of making. Like the highways are sort of land rivers, and then the nuclear disposal site and the landfill are a different version of ancient mounds or pyramids. And that makes me wonder if there are only a finite number of forms that humans can grapple with as signs of civilization. And in that sense, I feel like these just flatten the scale of time. 1,000 years ago, Cahokia was there instead of St. Louis. And that feels like a long time to us, but in the scale of geologic time, the age of the river, the amount of time the plastic in the dump will last, or the amount of time that the nuclear waste will take to break down, 1,000 years isn't a long time at all. And so that whole time scale is captured on these two maps.
Thank you. All right, next question, I'm gonna turn to MK, and I'm gonna ask you, you can pick to answer this one or the next one. So why are proposed, imagined, and reimagined sites, well, I'll just ask you this one and then I'll ask you the next one. Why are proposed, imagined, and reimagined sites important in 2020?
So greetings, everyone. The way I see it is that whenever we're talking about these sites that mean things to us, what we want to have happen in our world, it has a lot to do with our backgrounds. And our backgrounds speak to the things that matter to us most. So with that said, what's critical a lot of times, I think, is just making sure that these sites, whether they be proposed imagine, reimagine, that these sites speak to the world that we want to live in, the world that we want to be a part of, and not somebody, as mentioned earlier, not somebody's imagination for us that benefits and privileges them, but instead something that imagines a world that we can all be participants in. And I think it's critical that we, have those spaces to be able to not only propose, imagine, reimagine, but also to build at some point. Because when people see that monument, when people recognize that space, they recognize that we live in a new world. We live in a world that isn't about some of the ghosts in the past that haunt us and kind of keep us in these segregated spaces or in dominated spaces, but instead, liberated spaces where we can all be together and not have to worry about our neighbors doing us harm in the process. So anyways, that's the main, that's kind of how I see that. And it's about being empowered enough to be allowed to have this imagination, one, to be able to think about it, not to have to do like constant work. Because, the thing is about work is that if you are so alienated from that part of you that allows for creativity, then you can't imagine anything new. It's difficult to have vision when you are burdened. And so to have the kind of work that allows a whole person to be a participant in their own struggle, as well as in their own, life. So to be able to do that means that we've achieved some level of freedom that maybe people before us or even people now don't enjoy.
Thank you for that. I'm open. Liz, Allie, Derek, any of you guys want to take this one, or should we turn to the next one? I mean, we could talk about this one all day. I don't want to crush it. Yeah, please, Derek.
And I think that was a great point that you made, MK. These imagined spaces, it connects with some other things that we've talked about and that we have yet to talk about representation. For me, that was a huge thing. And in structures, the dominant culture usually has the most say and holds the most sway and has the most representation. And when you ask people to imagine things or reimagine things, then you capture all of those nuanced experiences, aspirations, and that representation gets built in. And so that's the thing that really stands out for me.
Thank you very much. I'm just saying thank you over and over again, and I have to unmute myself. Okay, I want to stay here because I think there's so much we can say, but I know, and maybe Derek, I think that what you just described sort of carries very much into this one. Maybe I'll turn this one to you, Allie, because I know you, well, partially because you drew this. Because I'm looking at it and I'm like, hey, that's Allie made that. And so I'll turn this one over to you, Allie. How do we talk about how people interpret space and public memory differently?
I wish that I could answer the question fully right now, but I think that's one for the whole career. What I can say is that even in a symbol like the arch, which I mentioned earlier, that we had moments of wanting to make the arch disappear and not be this sort of monolith that rises over St. Louis and is the one thing you think of when you think of St. Louis if you're not from St. Louis. But it's such a dynamic symbol, and I loved seeing how it was represented in the different maps. So it showed up on almost half of them. And the literal symbol of the arch that people drew, sometimes it was the only thing, like a child's map of St. Louis is just the arch, and it says, "This is awesome," and awesome spelled incorrectly. Or, it's this, a small thing, or like on the map that Derek was talking about, it's this distant visual. And the way that I saw it on the map, so this drawing is actually a Photoshop version of something that somebody drew on their map. And I flipped the arch upside down to cast this long shadow just to sort of symbolize that it means so many things. And in the same way that a sundial, the shadow goes kind of all the way around, and these different interpretations of the arch visually, it was captured at different angles or from above or sort of like at a slant. And I think that just the drawings alone captured how many different things people saw it as. And so this list here says a sign of home and hope, a sign of welcome, a symbol of forced relocation, a site for other monuments, other monument opportunities, problematic, awe-inducing. These are all things that people describe the arch as. And you know, everybody's seeing the same arch in space, but not everybody is looking at it and experiencing the same thing. And so this gets at as well what we're saying about representation in the monumentscape. If that's a translation of cultural imagination, who are we not seeing represented in that space, who is just existing in somebody else's imagination and trying to carve out space for themselves?
Thank you, Allie. So I love talking to Allie. I love talking to all of these people. This is such a treat for me. I'm gonna turn this one, Liz, I think in your essay, you talked about the way this data set works in terms of the varieties of interpretation. And so I guess I'll throw this one to you for a quick answer before we tackle the last one.
Oh, a quick answer is tough for this one. I'll do my best. I think something that really strikes me, and this kind of goes back to, or echoes, I think, a lot of what has been said, is that I feel like this process really allowed for a very broad interpretation of what monuments mean. I know that was a question that came up in the document, and that really allowed for, you know, this enhanced interpretation. And something that I see as someone who works with data a lot is that I've started to call this data set stories, because I think it acknowledges the very intimate place that it comes from. You know, I got to see people actually fill out these forms. I know that it comes with, you know, people's experiences and biases and all of these other things, which is wonderfully messy and I love. But also thinking about how that's kind of that can be a form of empowerment and interpretation, right? To understand someone's, how they're interpreting something is to also give them some sort of power to do so. And I think that gets to the idea of the imagined places. But to me, it also really starts to paint this very complicated and more realistic scene of the cultural landscape in St. Louis that, frankly, I don't know of another resource or publicly available good that does so in the same way.
Thank you. So the next question, I'm gonna turn to Derek first for this field on the form is one that when, you know, we in the Monument Lab team, research team, we've used paper forms in projects before, and we have had lots of conversations about whether we should ask people for gender, race, sexual orientation, all kinds of things. And in the past we have not, and this form we did, and I was gonna turn to you, Derek, to talk a little bit about why.
Definitely, this was really important to me, and I would like to preface my comments to say that I'm really grateful to Monument Lab and specifically to you, Laurie, and to Paul about the collaborative and the iterative process we went through to develop, even down to like these fields that we were collecting. Because honestly, I came into this with a little concern and maybe a little fear that maybe because white people were doing this, that this would be what my experience has led me to expect in many instances is this, let's just rah-rah and do what we white people recognize as important and you guys rubber stamp that. You know, and no offense to you guys, but what I found was that you were very interested and eager to elicit what was important and the nuances that we would bring individually and collectively. And so I commend you guys for that. And in terms of collecting this data, and I was an advocate for definitely the demographic and material that specifically highlighted race and gave people an opportunity to talk about race would pull out in the data things that would be missed without collecting that. Like the fact that the map has, that highlighted in yellow, all the Black St. Louis, that would have been lost entirely. And that would have been a tragedy, because I think that creates a profundity to the map, and gives it some insight that we would be really remiss in not having collected. Another thing I would say about the data is we asked, how do you identify? And honestly, I was leaning more heavily toward, you know, like it was a conversation, but I was leaning more heavily toward asking specifically, what's your race, and let people choose to answer it, choose not to answer it, instead of letting it broad. Because what I found in collecting the maps is people skipped the question altogether and did not identify. So there's a lot of maps. We have no demographic information collected. And I was a little sorry to see that that didn't happen. And if we had asked this question more specifically, we would have collected a lot more of that data, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, I mean, thank you, first of all, for what you said. Thank you. And thank you for changing our practice and the way that we think in a lot of ways, including this one, but in many ways. I want to offer this question out to the rest of the folks. And then I think we're probably not going to go into we'll probably just turn to Q&A, but I want to offer this one to any other folks. Liz, you want to jump in on this one? Your camera came back.
Yes, I'm back. I'll probably be echoing some of what Derek said, but I do think that this kind of goes along with the idea. To me, it was really important, or it was really interesting to see who it was very important for themselves to identify. I feel like some people, as Derek mentioned, actually quite a few people decided not to answer this question, even after we would explain, because I'll be honest, there was sometimes a fair amount of explaining to do with this question. Some people didn't understand what it meant, but that was part of the work to do. But something that really stood out to me is, for some people, it's very important to identify themselves. And I feel like there were at least 2 or 3 maps, more than that, I'm sorry. I wouldn't say 12 to 13 maps I can think of specifically, in which I saw people really not struggle, but really, really contemplate how they wanted to fill that out and how they wanted to identify. And I feel like that really gave a new context or meaning to some of the information that they would include on their map. It was kind of this interactive or intersectional process between identification and map making. It was really interesting to see how it played out.
Yeah. Anyone else for this one before we go to the next? I think we can, and we did have we did have like a very, very, very long and rich conversation about this. Okay, I'm gonna, the next thing that we talked about was asking, and it's just, I'm aware of time. We wanted to, and to make this a workshop, to give people an opportunity, and maybe we'll just do it in 2 minutes before we turn to full Q&A. I think we'll do it. Allie, do you mind dropping the link in there, or I can try to find it? I'm screen sharing, so my ability to do searching for, but I actually do want to try having everyone who's in this workshop right now, and I don't even know how many people that is, oops, go into the Google Doc that Allie just dropped there, and just type an answer to this question. What would you like to learn from this data? What questions would you like this data to help answer? I'm really curious. I want to sort of ask for you to help us see that. And since we are running short on time, maybe Allie, can you drop the second question in there too, and folks can just decide, and we'll just sit for a couple of minutes and look at those documents. So this is the second one. What kinds of creative data do you think are needed to create a more just society? So I'm just going to ask folks for the next 3 minutes to just use your fingers to do the typing, and we'll looks like a lot of folks are typing just in the big open notes doc, and that's totally fine too. We have these specialty docs for the big questions, but if you want to just type in the big notes doc, that's cool too. Thank you. If you're not in the documents there, it's fun to go see what people are writing. Thank you all. And I'll just open to Q&A now. There's so much more, and we'll leave these documents open for a few minutes. But I want to, if I think, obviously a lot of people have to go at what time is it in St. Louis? It will be 1 p.m. in St. Louis. And a lot of people have to go right then, and that's fine, but I think I at least can stay on and answer some questions. So if there are Q&As for that you really want us to answer now, maybe put those in the chat, because I feel like the document's overrun. So actually in the Zoom chat, if there are folks who want to ask us questions, I'm going to look on the doc for some questions that I think came up. Oh, look, is that Allie, are you answering these questions in that gray?
Yeah.
I knew it was you. Thank you. So a lot of these Allie's answering. Oh, someone asked a question that I've actually am seeing in the question too, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And I would actually, whoever this was, I would love for if you want to reach out, like right on the Monument Lab website or something. The question I see here is about avenues of how to provide accessibility regarding access to those who wish to contribute to data. That's a great question, and I'm gonna. I've been thinking about it a lot. Obviously, this is, this workshop would have been in person, and we would have thought a lot about accessibility. And I think the reason we've used paper forms for, the reason we've kept coming back to paper forms in projects is because of the accessibility. It's because removing the barriers of technology and all that have been really powerful. But now that we live in a global pandemic where we can't actually hand each other things safely to strangers in public, I think we are doing a lot of thinking about what does engagement look like? What does person-to-person engagement look like? How do we make these kinds of creative data expressions accessible most broadly in a world where handing clipboards back and forth is less easy? And it's something I'm really interested in. Any of the other panelists see questions in these places that you want to address? There's a lot in here.
This is a really broad one, but maybe we could take a stab at it. What kinds of creative data do you think are needed to create a more just society?
Can we just turn that over to MK, Liz, and Derek? What kinds of data do you think are needed?
I would definitely say that, the imagined as well as the erased, those are two sides of the same coin. When you talk about what is it that doesn't exist that you'd like to see, as well as what used to be here that's not here anymore, those two aspects are really important to kind of gauge who thinks what is important and how we can get more voices into the conversation.
Thank you. I'm tempted to say it's 2 p.m. That was the perfect answer to leave us on. And I'll just say, you know, please, you can order the map, the physical map for free. I mean, you could just register to have it delivered to you when it's printed on the Pulitzer's website. And we are, and I just want to express, and you know, please do use the data. I mean, this is, we made it for usefulness. You know, follow Monument Lab and Pulitzer on all of the social media. Check out our websites, and we're going to continue to answer questions in the docs for a few minutes, and then we'll close them for public editing and send them out alongside the slides for future conversation. I just personally want to thank, I'm about to cry with how much I want to thank this is going to be embarrassing, so I just got to get it out. Allie, who's been, as you can tell, it's like unbelievable. And the same is true for Derek and Liz and MK and our collaborators at the Pulitzer. It's just been an absolute honor and privilege to learn from and collaborate with all of you. So thank you all.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you all. Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who's here.
Ah.
It's been a pleasure. So I'm so glad that we were able to be a part of it. I know I appreciate it. Somebody with a sociology background, I was really interested in seeing how qualitative data can enrich our understanding about the society that we live in, as well as the imagined St. Louis as opposed to the actual St. Louis, right? So we all live in different kinds of St. Louis's, and I think that these maps reflect where people frequent, where people go, where people have gone, and where people want to go. And I really appreciate the moment that this created for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, me too. All right, I'm logging out. My gosh, you guys, thank you so much. Jeez.